So one of the important things to consider when thinking about the different types of radiation is what kind of radiation does it release? These are some different radioisotopes that might be released during a nuclear fallout, or from a nuclear weapon, or from a nuclear reactor accident or nuclear incident, maybe. So iodine 131 is really one of the more well-known ones that you hear a lot about, and cesium 137 is also one of the more well-known ones. So you think about what kind of radiation do they release, because that'll help you know what you should do, if you should shelter in place or evacuate, or and it's good information to know. And you also think about what's the half-life. And half-life is a way of describing, how often this radiation, an isotope might release that radiation. So cesium 137 and iodine 131 are beta-emitting isotopes, but their half-lives are different. Like cesium has a half-life of 30 years. And I think that's gonna mean like if within 30 years, half of the radioactive cesium will have undergone beta decay and become, well, what cesium becomes after beta decay, because it has now an extra proton, it becomes a different element that's more stable. And with iodine 131, its half-life is 8 days. That means after 8 days, half of the radio iodine has undergone beta decay and changed into another element, which is, with iodine, it's xenon. Okay? Because after beta decay, it'll gain that extra proton and it'll become xenon. Whereas with the cesium, becomes apparently barium. So that's one of the things you need to understand is, what kind of radiation does it emit? Like strontium 90. Not sure offhand. Polonium, though, is an alpha emitting type of radiation, really toxic. And when it decays through alpha decay, it decays into lead. But there's another thing to consider as well, not just the half-life and what the decay product is, but also there's something called especially with minerals, one mineral can be an analog for another one. Pretty common one you hear about a lot is mercury and zinc. Mercury and zinc work pretty much the same. Your body can't really distinguish them. So mercury binds into a lot of your zinc receptors, and so it can kind of get into your body in different ways and get into, whereas like iodine, of course, this radioactive iodine works just like your body will accept it just like it's iodine. So it will concentrate in various, like in the thyroid specifically. Cesium works a lot like potassium, so it will go into your muscles a little more. So that's the other thing to consider. I have some extra diagrams here, but like here's your thyroid system. But first I wanted to show the way the things go. Like with strontium, it works a lot like calcium, so it targets, it'll go into your bones more than, say, like cesium, which works like potassium, might go into your muscles more. Iodine works like iodine, which concentrates in your thyroid gland. And That's all I really know about those. So a lot of times, one thing that happens during a nuclear reactor accident is it's dependent on the weather where everything goes. You know, you can have like, you know, this is from a weapons detonation, but during a nuclear reactor incident or something, things can go into the atmosphere and then be carried by the wind and deposited through rain into the soil, or cesium especially can go into pretty much, it's really soluble, and it gets into the water, it gets into the food supply, you know, and it'll travel depending on where the weather is. So you kind of have to think about the weather after a nuclear accident as well, or where are the particles going? Where might they fall to the ground? Or into the water, or, you know, that was one of the things I think they were saying about the Fukushima accident, was that a big cloud kind of went over one of the major cities there in Japan, like Tokyo, and then the weather changed and kind of blew it out over the sea. So had that not have happened, it could have been a lot more contamination in a major populated area. So the weather plays a really significant part. And one of the ways, there's different medicines that are available that can be taken in an emergency. Like the one that's kind of the perhaps most well known is called potassium iodide. It also has an abbreviation Ki, and they're usually tablets. Another one is Prussian blue, which is it's usually a capsule, has to be encapsulated. Potassium iodide, on the other hand, you can get as a liquid. But the thing is, each one, like potassium iodide, works only to block out iodine, and it blocks it out of the thyroid gland. There are these tablets, and they're really high dose, 130 milligrams for adults. And there's smaller doses, and sometimes the tablets are scored. Potassium iodide can have some side effects, not just causing allergic reactions, but it can cause this kind of, you know, the reason it works really is because the thyroid gland concentrates radioiodine just like potassium iodide. You may have if you sometimes look on iodized salt, you'll see potassium iodide is an ingredient, but there's not very much of it because the thyroid gland kind of absorbs iodine through the diet. Maybe it's iodized salt too, that, you know, and it absorbs a little bit at a time. And this high of a dose of this potassium iodide, what its goal is to do is basically saturate the thyroid gland with potassium, with regular stable iodine, so that the radioiodine can't get there. You kind of can think of maybe like a coliseum or a movie, or someplace where there's a lot of seating, and if the seating's all full, nobody else can get in. So if there's radioiodine in the environment, it might be recommended that people take that potassium iodide, and then that fills up all the, you know, receptors or seats at the thyroid gland, so that this can't go in there and damage it. But when that happens, there's a process like a feedback system that will kind of shut down thyroid hormone production. And thyroid hormones are important for metabolism and growth and development. So one of the side effects of those medicines, potassium iodide specifically, is it can lead to some pretty serious side effects. That's why you don't want to just take them if you're not sure. Usually there'll be a kind of a news release of information saying that this has been released after an accident. It's pretty common for radioiodine to be released, as well as cesium is the other common one. And the Prussian blue is what kind of neutralizes cesium. There's a few other ones that are used for different elements as well. That's why I recommend visiting the link below to the to the article, because it's maybe a little more thorough, and it's maybe a little easier to understand because there's so much information available through the links at the article. It's hyperlinked to, you know, a lot of Wikipedia sources and a lot of Center for Disease Control, a lot of access to information, as well as I describe all of this as well. So that's kind of the basics of radiation. There are a few other things you might might want to have on hand, because sometimes with those potassium iodide pills, is if you don't have them, the distribution of them might run out, and it might be really hard to get them. But it's especially important to be careful with those with children, because if it impairs that thyroid hormone production. The growth and development also has to do with like the growth and development of the brain, and so you have to be careful and maybe monitor progress with the doctor. These are some other things. They're all kind of like baking soda. Baking soda is, you know, sodium bicarbonate. You're probably familiar with that. What baking soda does is it binds with uranium, and it makes the uranium less toxic, and it'll also buffer the kidneys, so when it's excreted, it's less harmful. So that's great. And then there's Epsom salt, which is magnesium sulfate. It's kind of like a bath salt. That's a plain bath salt, and what it's used for is, you know, detoxification. Like magnesium is good for detoxification. You can kind of run out of magnesium pretty quickly, and also like it will kind of keep things moving through the intestines a little more rapidly. But the other thing there is that's something called bentonite clay, and what it can do is if you consume the clay, it can kind of like, and you've had consumed or ingested some kind of radionuclides, the clay will help bind the nuclides a little bit and keep them from dispersing throughout your body, because, you know, you're catching them. It just has this property of like drawing in toxins. Like after Chernobyl, they baked clays into chocolate bars and gave it to the people. And that kind of helped detoxify a little bit. And so, you know, there's kind of like, you might have heard of like clay wax, clay masks. Clay masks. Like they do like facial clay masks with this. But there's different grades. There's food grade, and there's not food grade or cosmetic grade. So just some simple things like this can sometimes make a big difference. Like the clay, if you take it, and you can also make baths. They sometimes recommend to take baths in this stuff because it helps detoxify the same, or at least get it out of the skin. So you can do quite a few different things. There are some things that are also really important for detoxification. It's called glutathione and superoxide dismutases, and those are antioxidant enzymes that work in your body, but rely on things like sulfur, selenium, manganese. They rely on nutritive metals. So sometimes it's important to also make sure you're getting enough of the nutritive metals, for the same reason as you're taking potassium iodide, is to kind of make sure that you have enough and your body doesn't want to absorb these other things as well. So sometimes minerals will help as well, but a lot of times it's time dependent. You want the more longer the radiation is in your body, it's kind of the more damaging it is. So there's ways to kind of speed it and catch it and kind of get it out, or make it less toxic, whether it's or prevent it from the first time from actually getting in there. So that's that, and hopefully this information has been helpful, but I am not a doctor or a medical professional. The information provided is not intended as medical advice, nor do I attest to its accuracy, safety, efficacy, or originality. So thanks for listening, and take care.